Parak Yud Chet, the 18th chapter of Divrei Hayamim, continues with the life of David. Yesterday, David was told in the 17th chapter that he could not build the Beit HaMikdash. There would be a dynasty. God would be forever with his family. But his son, God will choose, will build the temple. Chapter 18 goes back into other wars and other things that David did. Sometime after that, David attacked the Philistines and conquered them, and he took Gat and its dependencies and the cities that were sort of the suburbs, we'll call them, from the Philistines. We know that the Philistines up to this point had been a terrible thorn in the side of Bnei Yisrael, constantly fighting against Bnei Yisrael. The ark was lost to them. They're the great enemy of the book of Shmuel up to this point, and of the book of Shoftim with Shimshon. And here David completely subdues them, completely conquers them. Vayachet Moab. Vayu Moab avadim leDavid nosei mincha. He also defeated the Moabites. The Moab became a tributary vassal of David. The idea of David and the Moab is, of course, an interesting discussion. David is the great-grandson of Ruth, who was originally a Moabite woman, a Moaviyah, who comes tachat kanfei hashchina. She joins the Jewish people. And here it's just described simply as a battle between David and Moab. But actually, in the book of Shmuel, when it talks about the battle against Moab, it talks about a very, very harsh punishment that David performs against the people of Moab. It's a very, very strange chapter where he measures out two lengths, two sort of ropes. One of the ropes is to be killed. The other rope, the people are supposed to live. And this is not so surprising. We've talked many times that this book is more idealizes David. He's perfect. He doesn't make mistakes. The Davidic dynasty, the temple, etc., etc. So it's not a surprise there that it wouldn't say those details, some gory, kind of brutal details that we have in the book of Shmuel when it talks about the battles that David had with Moab. And in fact, the Midrash, trying to understand it, claims that David had brought his parents, his family, to Moab to protect them when he was running away from Shaul. And the Midrash comes up with this idea that David did this to the Moabites because the Moabites murdered his parents, members of his family, and it was sort of, that's why he was so cruel to them. Here, there's no mention of that whatsoever. Continuing verse 3. David defeated Hadadezer, king of Tsova. So we're talking about now Aram, Syria, Lebanon, more Syria, the areas such as that, who was on his way to set up his monument at the Euphrates River. We know the Torah talks about the Jews eventually going all the way to Nahar Prat, all the way to the Euphrates River. We shouldn't take that into today's politics and today's situations, but here we see David, in a sense, conquering, going that far to an extent. David captured 1,000 chariots, 7,000 horsemen, 20,000 foot soldiers in his force, and David hamstrung all of the chariot horses except for 100, which he retained. So he kept 100, and the rest of them he got rid of. Some of the commentaries say the reason why he did this is because the pasuk in Devarim says, "Lo yarbe lo susim." The king, right? We've talked about it a number of occasions. It doesn't say the king can't have anything, but it says the king can't have too much. Can't have too many wives. Can have more wives than everybody else. Too many horses. Can have more horses than anybody else. But we need to put limitation. We need to put boundaries on the king. And so here there are those who say that's the reason why he only kept 100 of the horses from the chariots. Vayavo Aram in verse 5, Pasuk Dar Mesek, La'azor Lahadad Ezer Melech Tov Vayach David Baram Esrim Mushnayim Elef Ish. And when the Arameans of Damascus, yes, the word here says Dar Mesek. Presumably there's a resh somehow there. Damesek, we know Damascus. We have in other places the word Damascus, Damesek is used in the Tanakh. So maybe an extra resh that somehow made it in here. And David, so when the Arameans came to the aid of King Hadadezer, David struck down 22,000 of the Arameans. Vayasam David ba'aram David stationed garrisons in Aram of Damascus, and the Arameans became also vassals of David. The Lord gave David victory wherever he went. So here we see this. David is with God, God is with David, God is helping David. David took the gold shields carried by Hadazezer's entourage, and he brought them to Jerusalem to give to God. And from Tiba and Kun, towns of Hadazezer, David took a lot of copper, from which Shlomo made the bronze tank, the columns, and the bronze vessels. And here we start to see something about David, which we'll see more in this book. David is not allowed to build the Beit HaMikdash, we were just told in the previous chapter, but he's going to do everything but build it. He's going to try to get everything that Shlomo needs to build the Beit HaMikdash. And so here, when he's taking all this copper from these copper mines from the city, presumably it's with that intention that it's going to be used in some way for the building of this future temple, which, as we said again in the last chapter, his son will build. Vayishma Tohu Melech Hamat ki David kol chel Hadaezer Melech Tzova. So King Tohu of Hamat heard that David had defeated the entire army of King Hadaezer. Vaishlach et Hadoram beno el HaMelech David l'sha'al lo l'shalom ulevarcho asher nilcham b'Hadaezer v'akeu ki ish milchamot Tohu haya Hadaezer v'chol klei zahav v'chesed v'nechoshet. So when Tohu hears of this, he sends his son Hadoram, to King David, to congratulate him for his military victory, because he was at war with Hadaezer, and he brought to honor David gold and silver and copper. And what this shows is a second, right? David is feared, and David is also respected. David defeats enemies, and other enemies are joyous to help him, to be with him, to thank him, and perhaps a little bit of tension, a little bit of worry. If he defeated them, they can defeat us as well. And therefore, giving David gold and silver and copper, so they're not next on the list of empires or nations, whatever it might be, to attack. So what does David do with this? In verse 11, so what did David do with all the silver and gold that he got from all these nations? He dedicated to God. And it lists all the different nations that he got. He gave it all. He might have kept some of it, but he gave certainly the great majority to the Beit HaMikdash, not though it wasn't yet the Beit HaMikdash. And commentaries point out here as well, the Kesef v'Zahav lo yarbeh lo ma'od. We have that also back in, again, the book of Shoftim. This is about the 17th chapter or so, the book of Shoftim, the book of Dvarim, and Parshat Shoftim, that the king cannot have too much gold and silver. And so he gives it, he brings it, and it's also going to be materials that are going to be used in the construction of the future temple. Vavishai ben Tzruya et Edom begei Amelech Shmona Asar Aleph. Avishai, the son of Tzruya, struck down in Edom in the Valley of Salt 18,000 people. We have this idea of 18,000 being destroyed as well in the the book of Shmuel. There it doesn't say that Avishai did it. There it says that David defeats 18,000 Arameans or Edomites, depending upon different, but that's, again, we have differences here. Maybe we're trying to make David look not as violent here again. So it's Avishai who's killing them. Interesting, in Tehillim, it talks about that Yoav killed 18,000 of them. So we have different sources, different people who it's described or ascribed to. And obviously the question here is who is leading the battle. This is not an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie from the 1980s where one person kills 18,000. He also stationed garrisons in Edom, and all the Edomites became vassals of David, and God gave David victory wherever he went. Verse 14 is a very significant verse, because what does it say David does? David does mishpat u'tzedakah. He does justice, true justice, tzedek u'mishpat, and this is a very important thing for the Jewish people to do tzedakah and mishpat. This is the way to identify who a true king is in Israel, the way that Bnei Israel are supposed to act. And I believe I might be getting the words slightly wrong, but when God tells Avraham about his desire to destroy the cities of stone, because not that God wanted to destroy them, but because they were so wicked, he says, "Can I hide such a thing from Avraham?" And it says, back in Genesis, I found it 18:19. So Bereshit Yudchet Yutet Ki Yadativ L'man Asher Yitzaved Banav Vet Beito Achrav V'Shamru Derech Adonai La'asot Tzedakah Mishpat L'man Hevi Adonai Et Avram Eight Asher Diber Elav. Why do I have to tell Avram? I can't hide what I'm doing, because I have singled him out that he may instruct his children for all time to keep the way of God by doing tzedakah mishpat, doing what is just and what is right, in order that God may bring about for Avram what has been promised him. So we see here that David here, it appears to the way that I understand it, that David is fulfilling a prophecy of God to Avraham all the way those generations ago. David is the fulfillment of God's desires and the description of who Avraham was. So to me, very important verse, this verse 14, again, because David is doing tzedakah mishpat. Here the order is reversed, mishpat tzedakah. Continuing verse 15, Vayoav ben Tzruya. Now we'll talk about his administration, some of his warriors. We've had this before, we'll have it again. Vayoav ben Tzruya al hatzava, Yoshafat ben Achilud maskir. So Yoav was the commander of the army, Yoshafat was the recorder, I call him the secretary. The Tzadok, we're in verse 16, ben Achituv, Avimelech ben Aviatar, Kohanim, V'Shashva Sofer. We have Tzadok and Avimelech, who the son of Eviatar, were priests, and Shavsa was also a scribe. There's slight differences here in some places. Sometimes it says Achimelech, sometimes it says Eviatar, and sometimes the scribe's name in Shmuel is Sariah. It's not Shavsha, but not the biggest deal. Uvinayahu ben Yoyada, Kreti va'pleitu v'nei David arishonim Gilead hamelech. Benayahu ben Yoyada, we had mentioned earlier, is one of the groups of the three great warriors in his killing of a lion, and we talked about him in the book of Malachim, as he's Shlomo's executioner. He was the commander of the Kreti and the Pleiti, and David's sons were the first ministers. They were sort of the first people in charge of to assist the king. Now, the Gemara likes these words, kretu pleiti, and it says kretu pleiti, which it means that it was called this because they were decisive in their pronouncements, and they were, very exact in their actions, and were wondrous. And it's a reference to, according to many, to the Urim v'Tumim. But here, talking about Benayahu ben Yehoyada. And also one slight difference between here and in the book of Shmuel. In the book of Shmuel, when we talk about David's sons, it talks about them being Kohanim, is a word that's used there. And here, perhaps the word Kohanim is removed, because it's, a king can't be a Kohen. If you're from the family of David, you can't be a Kohen, you can't be a priest, you're a son of a king. And we saw in the book of Ezra, in the book of Nehemiah, book of Zechariah, questions about Kohanim, questions about their yichus, their lineage. Were they real Kohanim? Were they not the real Kohanim? And again, this question during the Second Temple, who are the real Jews? Who are they? The Shomronim, the Samaritans want to build a temple. These ones are making it difficult. So we want to have a very clear divide here between the families of the Kohanim and the family of King David. And each of them are doing their own. So even though at times, talked about that David, it's much more spiritual terms. David, during the bringing of the ark to Yerushalayim, it's almost like he's described as a Kohen in the clothing that he's wearing and the dancing that he's doing. But we want to make very, very clear that the Kohanim are Kohanim, the Melachim and their children are from the family of the Melech, and the two don't meet. So another chapter which we have a slightly different reading or writing or description of David's life, of his many wars against foreigners, and also showing how he not only was feared, but how he was respected, how people came to Yerushalayim, were giving him gifts because of everything that he did. And the chapter points out a couple of times that while we talk about David, it's really that God was in David's corner, allowing David to win these wars.